Howdy, guys. My name's Kelly Mack McCoy. I'm the author of Rough Way to the Highway. It's a novel about a trucker turned pastor turned trucker who hits the road again after his wife's murder. And he wants to get a little peace of mind and windshield therapy, but that'd make a very, very boring novel. So that's the last thing it gets. So I've got another book out now, totally unrelated, that was inspired by all the craziness going on the last several years. It's called The Sojourner's Road Home, a 40-day journey to the heart of God. And it was through that book, through the process going through the publisher, that I connected with Miss McAra here. And I'm very blessed to do so. And I think I'm going to learn as much as you guys, if not more, because I get to ask the questions. And so Lana McAra is an award-winning international best-selling author and ghostwriter of more than 40 titles. And I'm looking at my teleprompter here to make sure I get all the zeros right in these numbers. She's the author and ghostwriter of 40 titles with more than 1 million books sold. Is that amazing? And she's been a publisher with Barber Publishing, and a Wine Press Publishing for over 25 years. And she's been editing and ghostwriting for more than 20 years, working for Wine Press Publishing as well as Author One Stop and individual clients. She won the National Christy Award, which is a very prestigious award for Reaping the Whirlwind in 2001, and we've got some exciting news to talk about with that book here in just a minute. Okay, here's the big numbers here again. Her historical cozy mystery series, Colorado, sold more than 250,000 copies. And her titles have appeared in bookstores and libraries and around the world, and print, ebook, large print, audiobooks. And she's been teaching and coaching novel writing for over 20 years. So one announcement we want to make, Lana will be doing a drawing at the end of the masterclass. Someone right here in the Zoom room will get access to a call with Lana to discuss their novel project. And so hang around, guys, until the end for that. Very exciting time. I'm very happy to talk to Lana McAra. So tell us about yourself. How did you get started? Give us your background. It goes a long way back. I know it's a long story, 25 years plus, over 1 million copies. So give us some background on your publishing journey.
Wow, it was really unusual. A lot of times you hear people that are published, they say, I wanted to be a writer my whole life. And being a writer was the last thing on my mind. I hated writing. When I was in college, I was an education major with an English minor, and we had to write a lot of papers, and I hated those papers. And I never dreamed. I was really good at the grammar and punctuation, all that stuff, but I never dreamed I would be a writer. Well, I got married right out of college, started having baby number 1, baby number 2, baby number 3. I had 7 children in 12 years. Oh, wow. And I was pregnant with my 3rd child. So there I was, 2 toddlers and bored. I mean, I was busy, but I was just changing diapers and doing laundry and cooking meals and cleaning the house. I had no time for any kind of mental stimulation, So my mother-in-law brought over a stack of women's magazines for me. And I don't really know why, but she brought this stack of women's magazines. And I was just leafing through one, and there was this ad. It said, you can write children's books.
Oh, wow. I saw those.
Yeah, they were everywhere.
Yeah.
And I didn't even like to write, but something about it, it was just like one of those God moments, like, why am I here? So they had a little coupon, and you could send in, this is back before you had email. There wasn't even email then. You had to cut it out, mail it in, and they sent you a test. You had to fill out this test and apply. And so I filled out the test, and they asked you to tell a story about something that happened to you or whatever. And I did, and I passed, and they said, you did very well. You could really succeed at this. And I thought, that might be kind of fun. I'll do a correspondence course, and I'll fill out my little, my little exercises and classes and send them in, and it'll be fun. So somehow, I mean, we were poor as dirt. My husband at that time was making $7,000 a year. We had 2 toddlers. I was pregnant again. I don't know how we did it, but somehow came up with that money and sent it in. And, I'm going to him with this thing like, I'm asking him to buy me a Cadillac. That's how I felt, So I took the course. And when I took the course, I realized that the reason I didn't like writing is because college was so restrictive. You had all these things you had to look for, and there's no creativity at all in, those academic papers. So when I got into the space where I could actually tell a story, that really fascinated me, because what I haven't told you yet is all through school, I'm an avid reader. I cleaned out the library when I was in the 4th and 5th grade. Literally, I went through every book on every shelf, so I didn't miss any. That's how intense I was about it. I loved mysteries. I loved the fiction, format, and I had my heroes who are still my heroes today. And I had a foundation in stories. I loved it. And so when I found out what it really was, I was so addicted. I completed the course. I wrote the first book, and then I didn't get published for 14 years.
Oh, wow. Wow.
I rewrote that book 5 times. I wrote it 3 times, and then I realized, I'm sending it out to publishers. Rejection, rejection, rejection. I got so many rejections. And, some people I've heard say, well, I've papered my wall with the rejections, or I put them in a drawer and they filled the drawer. No, sir, I threw those babies away. I was not going to keep rejections. So 14 years. Eventually, I realized if I write historicals, the competition isn't as much. So then I went and I started getting Louis L'Amour books, and I read Louis L'Amour books like crazy to set the story back in the Old West. I had a notebook of notes that I did for my research, and I set the book back in the Old West. And that book, that first book, was the first of the series, Colorado, that sold 250,000 copies.
Oh, wow.
So after the 5th iteration of it, I sent it out, and Barber Publishing picked it up.
Oh, wow. Wow.
That was one life-changing moment right there, when Barber Publishing picked it up. They had a new imprint, and because they had a new line, I hit it at the right time and got into the new line. So I was a reader's favorite that year, and I won a national award 4 years later. So what was happening during that 14-year period was I was teaching myself how to write. I was reading writing books. I was reading novels that I had respect for, and watching what they were doing. And I took a second writing course in that time. And so sometimes I would put it away. I'd put the papers in a drawer and say, that's it. I'm beating my head against the wall. I'm just done. And next thing you know, 6 months later, I've got it all spread out. I'm looking at this and that. And it wasn't even a decision. I mean, I would just find myself in the middle of it. And like, wait a minute, here I am. I'm doing it again. It was in my heart. And now I know it was my calling, and you can't get away from that.
Right.
So yeah, so that's really how it all started. Now, I wrote the one book for 14 years. And after that one, I knew I wanted to write another one, but I had been focused on that one story idea for a decade, more than a decade. And it took me a while to figure out how to do another one. What else do I write about? Who else, what other characters and so forth. So it was a slow start for me at the beginning. I have a lot of empathy and compassion for someone who has been writing for a while and they just can't seem to click, because I've been there. I was not a natural. I learned and learned and learned.
Well, Lana, I know that you have a heart for people you just mentioned who have this thing in their heart. They know that they want to write. They've been, they had a book in their heart for years. My own background is much different than yours. I come from a very, very dysfunctional background. You look in the encyclopedia for dysfunctional family and you'll see the McCoy family there. It was very dysfunctional. But I actually had writing in my heart from the time that I was a little kid.
Wow.
But, nobody in my neighborhood, became a writer, really did any kind of white collar job. So I never did. And so one of the ways that I knew that I could write, that I could be a writer one day, I was like you. I love to read. I just consume books. I would love to go to like Barnes and Noble type bookstores, huge bookstores, and just go through the titles there. And I would pick up a book and, start reading some of it. I would be blown away by the prose. And I was like, I could never be a writer. I could never write like that. Then I go down the aisle there, I pick up another book, and the writing would be really bad. And this was long before, it's so easy to publish a book, self-publishing. And I thought, if somehow they managed to write that and get it put on a shelf in a bookstore, and then I know that I can write. That's how I knew. But it's something I always had in my heart, but I never did it. And, I had that mental block, like many of the people that'll be on this call with, or do. And so I never did until much later in life. My first novel was out 3 years ago. And now I'm kind of on a roll. I got the second one going. I've got other ones in the works. One of them's a children's book, that you mentioned, my first one. And I actually filled out one of those things too, long years ago. That just clicked with me when you mentioned that story. So I have that same heart for it, same heart for others. I know you do as a ghostwriter.
Mm-hmm.
Feel that need for others to get their story out, to help them get their story out.
Yeah.
So I hope the people that are on this call are listening and taking in, as I am, taking in as much as I can. So how did you work some of your own personal life into creating your novels?
Well, personal life lessons have been a big part of my success, I believe, because in that 14-year span from 24 to 38, when I got published, I went through a lot of personal transformation. And I came from a very dysfunctional family as well. And so when I was 13, my parents divorced and my father left. He moved to a faraway state and I didn't have any relationship with him for 30 years. So that abandonment was a major part of my self-worth, the way I saw myself. And my first book, Megan's Choice, was about a girl after the Civil War whose parents died and she was all alone and she had to figure the world out for herself. And so the feelings that I felt, I put them into the story. And her situation was something that I had experienced. And so as I went forward in finding story ideas, I began to hone in on those, because when you use something that's real to you, you have more insight, and the depth of the character and the depth of the message is so much better than you just get a cute idea to develop. And we see a lot of cute ideas out there, but a book that's going to actually change someone's life has got grounding into the human experience, because the human experience isn't always fun and lighthearted. We have bad days, we have bad times, we dig down, we find something inside of ourselves to keep going. and we move through it stronger, wiser, and so forth. And that's what our characters do too, isn't it? If we're writing a book with depth.
Yep. I know this has probably happened to you, but I know I've had several people come up to me. Again, the storyline of my novel is about a trucker turned pastor turned trucker who hits the road again after his wife is murdered. I've had a number of people come up to me and say, "Oh, you're a pastor? I didn't know that about you." And then they tell me they were sorry to hear about my wife. And I can tell you a long story about how all that came about. But no, I did not shoot my wife. But you probably have some stories where something similar has happened to you, because you do have that depth about you. You know.
Yes. Yes.
So
the book that's coming out in the spring is called Shaken But Not Stirred. I don't even have the cover for it. I have 2 books coming out next year. One of them is Reaping the Whirlwind, and then the second book is called Shaken But Not Stirred. And that's a story of a stalker. This woman has a stalker. She doesn't know who it is, and he's making her life sheer misery. And I had a stalker. I had a stalker in 2014. And that was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. And while I was going through it, yes, it was awful. It was horrible. It lasted almost 2 years between court cases and all that stuff that I had to go through after I called the police. It's almost like getting a book published, right? You think you're going to get the book and it's going to be done. Like you're going to call the police and that's going to be done. Well, no, you just started.
Right.
So I was journaling, taking notes and remembering, and these different images were in my mind. And so I took the core ideas, and this is a piece that I wanted to really talk about. We're not talking about memoir. Memoir is when you tell your life story to share, with people, maybe your family or maybe others. But what we're talking about here is you take the nuggets, you take the insights and the core of the story, of the situation, and you put it into fictionalized people and places. Nothing in the story resembles what you actually went through. So for me, it was after my divorce. I broke up with someone. I didn't realize the person was literally a psycho. He'd been in mental hospitals. And, later on, I found out the hard way, I guess. But in the story, the woman is a psychologist, and she thinks it's one of the family members of a client, like a woman whose husband was abusive. And she told her, this isn't working. You're going to have to get a restraining order or something, retaliation from someone like that. That's what she thought. So it didn't even come close to what I had experienced. But yet at the same time, there's the escalation. They start off by just bombarding you with calling, texting, being outside the house and stuff like that. And then it escalates to vandalism, personal threat, personal attack. And this kind of thing keeps going on. And that is what the story shows. It also shows, what do the police do when they come? What do you have to do to protect yourself? And so I call that impact-driven fiction, because what my purpose is for this story, it's a good read. It's very interesting. You don't find out who the stalker is until the last page, but it actually teaches people what it is, how these things work, and what action you should take. Because in my experience, I had no idea. I'd never been around anything like this before in my life. And I had expectations of what the police would do when I called them. That didn't happen. So it is actually educational and entertainment at the same time.
And they don't actually have to go through it, but they feel like they're going through it for the, 6 or 7 hours it takes to read the novel, though. That's amazing.
Yes, absolutely.
So when one of your students comes to you and they say, "Hey, I've got this idea, I've got this message I'd like to get across. Is it a good fit for a novel?" What would you say to them, and how would you determine that?
There's a few different qualities that you need in a story idea. One of them is it's universal. Everyone has experienced abandonment at some point. Yeah. Or for me, the terror, like, what if I'm mugged, and what if I'm robbed? What if, this or that happens? Or maybe you have been. So it's universal to everyone. And then it's relatable. People can understand if somebody gets a cancer diagnosis. We all, even if you've never had one, you understand what that means. That means a lot more than just getting better. It means your whole family dynamic is going to change. Your schedule's out the window, all the money that's going to have to go out, and all these different things. So that is relatable. And then it's emotional. There's an emotional element to it that is very powerful, because the emotion is what draws the reader, to dive right in to the story. And then the last thing is that it is life-changing. It has to be big enough. So, for some people, getting the kids out the door for school is pretty traumatic, but it's not life-changing.
Right.
Yeah.
We all have a lot of drama around us all the time, or often, but yeah.
Right. I call them before and after moments. So when you go through something that changes you, there you go. And so what I tell my students is, look back across your life. What are those before and after moments, those things that happened that shifted your view of the world, that shifted your view of yourself, that made you more wise and brought you into maturity even? Those are the things that would qualify for a novel that will be a powerful, impact-driven novel.
Now, I remember it depends on how you define right. My novel, I spent a good 2 years writing, and that is serious writing. I belong to a writer's group, and I spent a lot of time, had it critiqued the whole way through. But a lot of times I just came, now you may have experienced this early on. I'm a pantser, I just fly by the seat of my pants and just start writing. And so there were times when I wrote myself into a corner, and I kind of just had to jump ahead to something else and come back and fix it. Now, the way that you go through your course, I mean, you show writers how to fix that early on, because if you spend 2 years writing a novel, I mean, my goodness, you could write what, 6 or 7 novels that amount of time, if they use the techniques that you're going to teach them. But just doing it on your own, it's very time consuming.
It is very time consuming, and it can be time consuming either way. I spent 2 years on Reaping the Whirlwind, and the reason for that was it was set in a historic event, the Scopes trial. And I had to research the Scopes trial, traveled to Dayton, Tennessee twice, went through hundreds of hours of courtroom reports and newspaper articles and all these things to just get all of this rounded world, because the world I was creating in that book was real, and I wanted it to be authentic. Yeah. If you're creating a world that's made up, it isn't as time consuming, because you could just make it up, as you go. But what I did after book 1, I went into book 2, which was not the second book of the series. It was a whole different book. I didn't even think of writing a series at that time. That came later. But as I was going through the second book, I realized I'm doing a lot of the same tasks over and over again. The same things I did in the first book, I'm repeating them now. And I'm also backtracking, like, wait a minute, in chapter 3, what was that happened? And then I have to go back, look at chapter 3, then come back and, draw the connections and so forth. And so because I am a project manager, I saw systems and processes that we could use to shorten down the time. And so I created an entire spread of charts, graphs, worksheets, questionnaires, and diagrams and different things to help corral all that information. There are hundreds of details in a book, and I have probably more than half a dozen, at least half a dozen worksheets and things for character development, so that you can actually get into a rounded character before you start writing, so that you are not spending all that time trying to figure out the character as much. They'll show up quicker if you use that. And then the plotting also for a chart with each column is a chapter, and each chapter has 3 boxes. So you have 3 scenes, usually, sometimes only 2, sometimes 4. But I just write a little few notes in each box to say what each scene has. So when I'm looking for, wait a minute, when did he say that? I can go to that chart and find it immediately. And then I'm there, I'm good. And so the charts and the worksheets that I use has been key to my ability to write faster. So that when I was doing 2 and 3 books a year, that's why I was able to do it that quickly. Of course, you know, I was in the flow of it. You know, I'd written a couple of books by now. I had gotten, you know, the hang of it. And so then it became more like a career for me, instead of, you know, like weekend warrior type of hit it. When I was homeschooling my 7 children, I wrote 15 books and homeschooled my 7 children in about a 15-year period. I was a workaholic. And people say to me, how did you do all that? I'm like, don't do it. Do not take me as an example. My body was run into the ground because I had personal development stuff I was running away from. And what I would do is I would escape through work. If I was upset, I'd go scrub the shower. Yeah, I'd scrub the shower like I was a mad person. I guess it was a little crazy, but yeah. So work was my go-to, you know, for a lot of the stuff that was inside of me. And so, yeah, I do advocate for using the worksheets and that kind of thing because it helps. But I would never, you know, say work a full-time job and write till midnight or 1 and get up and do it again. No, I don't think that's a balanced life. You know, so I have kind of mixed emotions. Yes, book number 42 is coming out next year, but I'm kind of prouder of the ones that happened after I went through that frenetic, crazy stage, you know, of my life.
Well, you know, Lana, they say that all writers are either an outliner or plotter or a pastor like me. Could you take somebody on like me who is a hopeless pastor and teach them to, you know, focus and be a little bit more organized? Because I can see the value, and actually I've learned to plot more as I go along, because it's just trial and error. It does take a long time to just start writing, and then you start thinking, wait, did I already say that, or did we have this conversation before, and that kind of thing. So how does that work for somebody like me?
That's such a good question, because I started out without any of these helps, and I hate rewriting. I can't stand it. To me, you know, it's like tearing up the floor and putting it back down again. Why would you want to do that? You know, such a waste of time. And so I actually went to the more structured way in order to stop from having to redo stuff. So what I would say to that is, when you get really versed and really comfortable with the elements of a good plot, and I have a page called the plot paradigm, where you can see at the midpoint, I want to be at this place. And even if you don't, you know, plot out the chapters like I do, at least you know where you're headed, and you know what a midpoint is. And the value of a midpoint, the midpoint of the story, and it's almost exactly in the center. And I've got one of the books here. Let me pull it up. So if you open your book and you find the middle, usually there is a massive shift in the story at that point. That's why it's called the midpoint. So in a mystery, which is, I write mysteries, in a mystery, in the midpoint, the person who's trying to solve the mystery discovers, oh, so-and-so who I thought was the person isn't the person at all. As a matter of fact, what I'm looking for is not even related to that anymore. I'm going off in this other direction. Complete shift in the storyline. That's the midpoint. And so when you identify that, then you have kind of like a roadmap, you know, in your head. I'm going to get to this point after chapter so-and-so, you know, chapter 10 is going to lead me to this big explosion event that the the character is saying, oh, I was on the wrong track. I need to go over here now. And that alone will help. And through the first part, the second part, there are other junctures where you want the story to twist in different ways. It doesn't have to be as exact as midpoint. It could, you know, they can shift around and stuff like that, but at least, you know, I need a major event coming up here somewhere, because the plot needs to have a rise in tension, and then a release, and a rise and a release, a shift in direction. And before the last chapter, you want a dark moment where the worst thing that could ever happen happens. So, you know, at that point, the reader's going, I don't care if it's 4 o'clock in the morning. I've got to, you see what's going to happen.
Right.
So the structure does not stop your creativity. It just helps you to launch yourself mentally from one point to another as you are unfolding the story, because I don't fill out the second half of that chart usually. That helps me to get the first half done. And by the second half, I kind of know where I'm going now. And I might make a few notes, but I'm not going to be as rigid with the planning because I've got it set up. And
yeah, I did much of the exact same thing that you're saying, but I didn't have it structured or written down. I had it stuck in my head. I knew, you know, what was going to happen, you know, what was going to happen at the end, to the very end scene and everything, and what was going to happen in the middle of the novel, and a few things on either side of that midpoint you spoke of. But it would have saved me a lot of time and a lot of grief if I had written that down, other than just relying on what was in my head. I mean, I can see the benefit of having it written. I don't want the structure to follow.
Right. And that notebook, you know, the downloadable notebook that everybody had access to, that's actually a notebook that I used to write Shaken But Not Stirred. When I did the video, I was showing that. And it, you know, it grew into the notebook because I had too much stuff to pack in there. And I still do paper. I mean, you know, call me old fashioned, but nobody's going to drop coffee on that notebook and it'll be gone forever. I mean, I just have this paranoia, you know, years of my life are in this machine and I want it solid. So I have it forever, because what happened to me was my first book came out and the fan mail started coming in, and I had all this fan mail from Barber Publishing. They send it out once a year at the end of the year. And I got these big padded envelopes, and, you know, just dump it out on the dining room table. And my kids are going crazy, pulling stuff out and reading it. Look at this. It was awesome. And I had so many people begging me for more for the different characters. What happened to so-and-so? What happened to so-and-so? And so I contacted the publisher and I said, would you be interested in a second book? And they're like, oh yeah. And so we did a third. And then the publisher contacted me and said, if you'll write a fourth, we'll bundle it into one book and put it out to mass market. And so that's how I got Colorado out to the public, was because of fan mail. And this is something I wanted to bring up as well. And that is when the feedback starts coming in from people that you have touched with your story, people whose lives have been changed, people who have been affected, it does something in your heart. And all those 14 years, I was alone. I was writing in a vacuum, kind of, without a whole lot of feedback. And when I started getting those letters, it just washed over me. This is communication. You are putting out these ideas and these lessons for other people to absorb into their heart and soul, because that's what we're here for, isn't it? We're here to make a difference. And so when I realized that, wow, it was mind-blowing for me, because I find that a lot of times people don't respect fiction. They think it's fantasy, imagination, but fiction touches people in a deep core part of their soul, their heart, that a self-help book can't get to. And there are also people who would never pick up a self-help book, who will read a novel and all of a sudden, boom, you know, it helps them. And there are some writers who are really famous for it. I think Nicholas Sparks is a good example of somebody with the courage. I don't have that courage. I'll be honest with you. I've been through some very hard times in my life. Writing about death like he does is a little bit too much for me. But he just reaches in, grabs your heart, and yanks it out. I mean, he is just amazing. We don't have to go that far, but we can still shift a perspective and help someone understand some different things that have, you know, been part of our own growth. So I love fiction, and I love helping people write fiction because I believe in it.
Well, I know so many people, Lana, and I know you do too, that start talking about their story. It may be their personal story or someone around them, and they want to write it. But once they start getting into it, the process, they realize they've got, you know, this person and that person that they're going to offend. And then you have the legalities and all that. So they say, forget it, I'm just going to write a novel. You know, you can have it based on a true story, and and so many of those things, for the very reasons that you mentioned, are built right into the story that are going to touch the heart, because they come from the heart, you know,
Yes.
and they're true, you know. So I know I have a gentleman right now that I met not long ago. He's a pastor and a chaplain and a counselor. He worked with mostly women who had been sexually abused, and you know, he's writing a story that is a composite rather than having it based on one particular person. And that's just that's something that many people are going to relate to. Even though it's going to be fiction, it's going to touch hearts, just for the very reason that you mentioned a while ago. There's so many of those stories out there.
Sure, it meets all the criteria. It's universal, relatable, it's emotional, and life-changing. So absolutely. And I love the fiction format, because when you get into fiction, there's a technique to it. If you make your fiction a platform for lecturing or preaching at people, you're going to lose them. And so the message comes from the shifts and the changes inside the main characters, either one or two of them. And that intrinsic shifting is where the power comes, not in lecturing. This is something that I see a lot when I'm editing, is that people have this really powerful urge to tell the truth about what they're trying to deliver. And I totally respect that, but there's a way to do it that you don't lose the reader, because the story has to have a validity to it. And the information needs to come from the story energy rather than pasting it on as dialogue or some aside, paragraphs that the author sticks in that isn't even part of the story. So one of the things I teach when I teach my students is to honor the story and bring the message in as an intrinsic part of what happens, rather than trying to paste it on as something that you're adding to the story level. It doesn't actually improve the story or support the story. And I found that a lot in the Christian world when I was working as an editor at Wine Press. This was something that was very common. And that's really how I started coaching, because they were asking me, Wine Press was asking me, this author has got a good idea and the story's almost there, but they need some help to elevate it and bring it up. And so then I would go in and help them to take out the preachy part and put it into the intrinsic development of the characters rather than, pasting it on. So anyway, there's my little soapbox.
Well, this is your soapbox here, Lana. We're here to listen to you. So, okay, I don't know how much time we have here. I'm kind of getting lost in the whole thing, but do you have time enough to talk about reaping the whirlwind?
Just for a minute, because we're about almost quarter till at this point. Okay. Reaping the whirlwind happened as a sidebar. I was at my family was in a different town. We weren't at home, and we had a night where we had nothing to do. We went to this university, and they had this creationist seminar. And so we went over there, just, hanging out. And the speaker got up there and said, the Scopes trial, in the pivotal court case that brought evolution into the public schools, was a total sham. Nothing happened like you thought it happened, that you've heard. It was a total sham. And that's all he said. And I went, whoa, I got to find out what that is. And so immediately I went to the library. I got the biography of John Scopes, William Jennings Bryan, and Clarence Darrow. I got all three of their biographies. I was so happy the library had all of them. And I read all three biographies. All three of them agreed the entire court case was a sham. It was set up by the ACLU, a fake test case in Tennessee, because Tennessee had just made a new law that it was against the law to teach evolution in the public schools. And so they wanted to throw it out at the Supreme Court level. So they made up a case. John Scopes never taught evolution. He didn't even teach biology. And he was just a kid who they picked because he didn't have a family, because the biology teacher said, absolutely not. I've got to raise my kids. They're going to have a stigma. I'm not doing it. So they said, oh yeah, John Scopes, he's over there on the tennis court. Call him over. He came off the field, came in. They said, we want you to do this, that, and the other. And he said, okay, I don't care. I'll do it. And so the entire thing was just a total put up job. So that was the foundation of what got me started. The story fascinated me, but then I wanted to bring an application. So I created a serial killer in Dayton during the trial to show what epigenetics and some of these other eugenics, not epigenetics, eugenics, what eugenics actually is. And we have it all over the place today. Today, it's just commonplace. But that was my purpose. And I never dreamed that my book would win a national award.
So tell us when the re-release, the new release.
The new release, and I just got my new author copies. The new release is going to be in June, because the publisher went out of business and Morgan James picked it up. So it's for pre-order. You can get it for pre-order now on barnesandnoble.com and some of those places. So
okay, great.
So what I would like to wind up with here is that I'm offering a course on how to do all this. And if you go to howtowriteanovelthatsells.com, you can see the course. It's an 8-module course. And in it, I include all the worksheets, the diagrams, everything that I use to create my own books are in the course. I'm actually teaching you my method and also the reasoning behind why do we do the plot this way? What are the main plot points? And all the different things about characters. There are 2 modules on characters alone. Setting, how to use the setting to bolster your theme and your characters and the mood and so forth. And then how to create good villains. Good villains are really important, and they aren't necessarily bad people. They could just be people that have a different agenda, cross purposes agenda with you. And also how to create relationships between your characters that are realistic and all of that. So if you want to learn more, just go over there. You can see the website over there. We're going to be starting on February 5th. It's 8 modules out. One of the things that I've seen lately, there's a lot of different novel courses coming out right now. I have no idea why. I just got, this is a course I had back in the early 2000s. I ran it for like 8 years. And then after a while, when I went through my divorce, I shut everything down, and I'm just now bringing it back. And this is a course, this is a college course. I am going to be sitting with you in a Zoom call for 2 hours and a half or so, hour and a half to 2 hours, teaching the material, answering questions every week for 8 weeks. And then we're going to have a Facebook group where you can put your questions over there, interacting. It's a massive time investment for me, but that is something I have really wanted to do for a long time, at least 4 or 5 years. I pulled it out different times and it just wasn't time yet. So this is something that has been around for a while, and I'm just bringing it back. So if you want to go over there, there's more about it. I don't want to, belabor that. So I think we can go into the questions if anybody has any questions. If you want to unmute and ask anything, you're welcome to.
Hi, Lana.
Jump on in there, guys. Oh, there he is.
Yeah, hi. Lana, this is Morris, and I'm a friend of Kelly. I'm doing the book that he had referenced just a minute ago. I had written a memoir recently, and then I have this idea of this novel. I jumped in at about 3:15. I got distracted with some other stuff, but all of the things that I've heard you say were very affirming in terms of how I've been approaching it. And I guess my question is, how would memoir is nonfiction? What the fundamental difference would you say writing nonfiction as opposed to novel?
When you're talking about a memoir as opposed to a novel, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. The memoir is based on your actual life, so that the characters in it are real.
Mm-hmm.
There is a difference in creating characters, from scratch compared to creating characters that are real people, because real people have their preferences and their idiosyncrasies and, their persona, their personality.
Right.
That, is going to be, it's rigid. It's what it is, right? So you don't have very much leeway in what you tell, but there is a huge correlation. And I've used this in my ghostwriting, because most of my ghostwriting is nonfiction. I've written 3 memoirs, as well as other business books and things like that. But to be able to create a well-rounded scene. So if you have a major event and you want to tell what happened, well, we were in the car accident, and then the paramedics came, and then we went to the hospital, and this is what Aunt so-and-so said, and this is what Mom and Dad thought we should do, but we didn't do it. And all of those different things that happen, to be able to portray that in a rounded way, so that you're catching the details that create the people, where people are reading it and actually visualizing and seeing it.
Yeah.
The details of the scenes in, you know, the hospital room and on the road and all of that, to be able to capture those things and create them in a 3D way is so much more powerful than just writing a flat account, kind of like an article, you know, that you're telling it all. If you can learn the techniques, and one of the things that has helped me so much in my ghostwriting is that I did know how to create character, how to create dialogue, and all of these things. So when I'm writing a case study or a memoir or whatever, it becomes real to the people rather than just a thing where you could be like, I told you, you know, I'm telling you, instead of I'm showing you and I'm allowing you to feel what's happening through the way that I'm portraying it. So you're immersing the person in the scene rather than simply telling them, you know, a flat account of it.
Yeah.
Is that answer?
Yes, I think so. And, you know, in the nonfiction writing, or in just some other research that I've done in terms of writing, because it's like, this is somewhat new to me. You know, often people talk about concision and leaving out details, or not becoming too detailed. And yet, from what you're describing and what I'm experiencing, is that there is value in the details in order to create a picture in people's minds, putting them into place and in the scene, things like that. So I guess I'm at a point of learning the values, or what details to include that would add value, rather than just be, you know, just adding words to the text, making a story longer. Because you can also, I would suppose that if you have too many details, that you can lose people.
Absolutely. You don't want to turn into Charles Dickens, you know, or he writes 8 pages before he even starts anything.
Yeah.
And today's world will not tolerate that. They don't read it. So what you're asking is a very high level question. So congratulations. This is next level writing here. So there is something called omission, where you leave out some stuff. Like you bring them up to the brink of it and don't tell them.
Okay.
There's that skill, and there are some really good writers who do that. Alestar McLean was an old action writer, and he's a master at that kind of thing. The other thing of it, the other piece of it is hand picking select details, and it doesn't take many. You may have 2 or 3 in a scene that embody the entire thing you're trying to get across. And so selecting the details in what they say, or what they do, or where they are. If you say his coattail knocked over the China shepherdess on the hutch, immediately you know. You're in an older person's home, probably a woman, and she has nice things that she loves sitting around. It's probably a little cluttered. Just that one piece is going to bring forward an entire image. And so that is what you're looking for. So as you're creating your scene, you're thinking, what would be the one detail that would give a picture to someone in this one sentence? So the writing looks sparse, but in fact, it's extremely powerful. Sarah Plain and Tall is a book I highly recommend. It's a children's book, but wow, the writing is incredible in that book, Sarah Plain and Tall. So this idea, and I love the fact that you're getting that you can select the certain details that will portray character, situation, emotion. It doesn't take a lot if you're careful in which one you pick.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Morris.
Oh, I have a question.
Yes, Alan.
I have a lot of ideas, and like my strong point is like getting creative ideas for stories. But my weak point is kind of like grammar and basic writing skills and like putting stories together. Do you have any recommendations for any good books that could help me increase my writing skills?
Yes, I do. It's going to be kind of hard. Well, you're going to get the recording, so you can get it when you get the recording. Strunk and White's book, The Element of Style, is a good one for showing how words work together. There's another book called Making Your Words Work by Gary Provost, which is again about exactly what we were talking about, Morris, not wordy. Make your words work. Every word should work. And I would like to encourage you, Alan, you can hire an editor. Just hire an editor. Don't worry about the grammar. Don't worry about the spelling. Don't worry about anything. Just get in there and write that story. Just write it. Just however it comes out, let it happen. Because when I finally got it through my head, the first draft doesn't have to be good. It just has to exist. Once it exists, you can fix it. But until you pound it out and get it out there, nothing's happening. So yeah, just to get over that, if you've got some good ideas, even if you're only writing snippets, you know, like they went here and they did this or this happened, because I encourage people, and in the course, there's also something that I call your idea notebook, your idea journal. You can write those paragraphs, stick them in that other notebook, that second notebook. And then when you're ready to go ahead and create a cohesive whole, you've got an entire pantry of ideas, characters, word phrases. Sometimes I'll come up with a word phrase and I've got to rush to find a pen because I know in 5 minutes that's going to be gone. So I will write that down and stick it in that journal, or stick it on a sticky note, you know, and put it where I know I'll be able to catch it later. So just get it out there. Don't let any kind of holdback or self-doubts or I'm not good enough or whatever. Don't let that stop you. Just get it out there, because you can get a book coach to come and help you fix it. You can get an editor to come and help you fix it, and you'll learn. You know, you'll learn. When I'm editing for somebody, I'm teaching them, because one of the things that helped me to elevate my own writing, I had a really good editor. And when she brought me back changes, I would be like, okay, now why did she tell me to do this? I wanted to understand it. And so that brought me up to being a better writer. She was amazing. And she had every book I did for about 10 years. I never sent it off without her checking it. And I'm an English teacher. Okay. So it doesn't matter about that. Once you get so deep in the weeds with your story, you can overlook stuff. Your mind will just skip it. So it's good to have other people look at what you're doing and get their feedback and their help. So. Is there anything else?
You're just about out of time. I just had a quick question. Kelly, you mentioned you use terms of plotter and pastor in terms of your approach. Can you define or describe what those are? What you mean by that?
Well, the words themselves are descriptive. An outliner or plotter is someone who has the book already outlined. They know the plot, which a pastor will generally have a general idea, just like I spoke of earlier, of where the novel is going, the main events, you know, what's going to happen in the middle and all that, but it's in their head. When they start writing, the very word pastor comes from somebody who flies by the seat of their pants in their writing style. They just start writing. And there's a lot of great writers. that are like that. And then, but I envy the outliners and the plotters. And I learned somewhat to do that along the way. And you know, I've talked to you a little bit about your own writing process.
Mm-hmm.
And you're doing a lot of the work now. You're plotting as you go along.
Yeah.
And, you know, you already had that, as I did, you know, the major events along the way, but you're plotting along the same way. And that's, you know, that's going to serve you well on towards the end, you know, that, you know, much what Lana spoke with you're doing, spoke about, but that's the difference.
Okay.
And they're, you know, they're great writers that do both. But if you're going to write a lot, you're either going to have a lot of time if you're going to fly by the seat of your pants, or you're going to have to outline,
Mm-hmm.
you know, outline.
And the outlining process doesn't have to be so detailed. If you are one of those people who your creativity flows in that way, just make your outline so brief, 2 words, just something to give you a little structure, just enough to keep you on the right track. What really irritated me when I was trying to do it that way is I would get on tangents, and the next thing I know, I'm over in New York City and I'm supposed to be in Miami, you know. And so to eliminate the tangents, I started to get more structured, so my mind didn't veer off on different things. Now, sometimes those veer offs, you know, become genius, but for me, they were just plain irritating. So that's why I did it a different way. Well, thank you so much. And let's see. How are we going to do this? We have 2 people. One of you is going to get a phone call with me. And so Kelly, pick a number from 1 to 10. And okay. And so I'm going to say, Alan, if you could pick a number from 1 to 10, and before you do, if he is under, let's see how we do that, because he'll just pick a low one. Have you got an idea, Kelly?
Well, one is 5, 1 to 5 and above, and 1 5 and below, I guess.
Okay. So, Kelly, Alan, what's your number?
7.
What was your number, Kelly? Oh,
7.
it was? Oh my God.
I'm sorry I jumped in there. Sorry, Morris. It was.
No, it's okay. It's fine.
How did you know?
Yes, it's meant to be. That's all I can.
That's fine. This has been good. This has been already been helpful. So
Okay, very well. I will reach out to you, Alan, to tell you how to get your call. So.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming. And
you.
I would love to work with you if you decide to take the class. If it's for you, you know, we'll have a lot of fun over there. So thank you so much. Kelly, thank you for everything. Appreciate it.
How to write a novel that sells.com.
I wrote it down.
Okay. All right. See you later. Bye.
God bless you.